You got to do a hello and howdy, not least because Tyler's from Texas.
I
Yes,
can't do howdy. I can't do howdy.
doesn't come natural to you. Yeah.
Exactly. Hello and welcome to another episode of Verse Talks. We are extremely excited today because we have a special guest, and our guest is Tyler Hobbs. Welcome, Tyler. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Layla. Hey, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me.
Tyler, what I've realized while I was speaking earlier to Jamie when we were speaking about you joining today and what we want to talk about, that it's been exactly 3 years, almost to the day, since we've had our first sort of collaboration with you. Because when we first launched Verse, we launched Verse under an exhibition called This Is Tomorrow, and we invited, I believe, 12 curators, and those curators were either actual curators or critics or thinkers, but also artists. And you were one of the artists, and I think you were part of part 2. We rolled them out over 4 parts, and in the part that you were in, it was you, David Shrigley, Hamad Nassar, and one more, Annika Myers. You were the 4 curators. And it honestly, Tyler, it's almost to the date 3 years. So I think it was the 23rd that we did the release with you, and you brought no other than Zancan to
Yes.
Verse.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And honestly, I'm going to say this, like, I don't think if it wasn't for you, we weren't on the map like that. Like, we didn't really realize what a big deal it was. It was an interesting time for Zancan because he was kind of getting very well known, but nothing like it wasn't the peak. So you definitely had picked up a really interesting artist, and but not that everybody knew at that point. And when the work was released, do you remember, Jamie? We were like, "Well, they just keep selling. What is going on?" Just the number of the sale just gone. It was so foreign to me because
You didn't know quite how legendary Zancan was at that point.
no,
Yeah.
and also it was my first like digital sale. Like, how did we just sell so many works? This is crazy in a very short amount of time. Do you remember that, Jamie?
Yeah, it was mad. And yeah, thank you so much, Tyler, for that.
bringing
It was
that
awesome.
to us.
Of course. Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, so I want to actually just circle back to that time. Why did you trust us? Why did you even work with us? We were like non-existent at that point, and I'm so grateful you did.
I'm grateful I did too. For me, it was a little bit of an interesting opportunity. Nobody had really asked me at that point to play more of a curatorial role. And yeah, I always loved the opportunity to highlight and celebrate the work of another artist who I think is doing amazing work. And I think at that point, Zancan hadn't put out a ton of digital work, but certainly there were a number of works that he had made. I think some of his garden monolith works were out there at that point, and I mean, they were just fantastic. I mean, I just instantly connected with his work, and I wanted more people to see that, and so it just felt like a good opportunity for that to happen. And kind of given your background, I thought it was a nice mixture, and so yeah, that just occurred to me naturally, and it felt like a good fit. And sometimes you gotta trust your gut a little bit, and I'm glad that it was for the best, that it worked out well.
Me too. And it still sits in my mind like a very nice memory. And I'm really like, I just love the serendipity that we're sitting here 3 years on. So this is really nice.
Me too.
I'm very wary, Tyler, that we've shared no agenda. We haven't discussed even a tiny bit about what we're going to talk about.
That's perfect for me.
We can cut anything that doesn't feel quite right. Is it cool if we just kind of
let's just
see what happens?
Talk. You can edit it for
things.
flow, but I'm happy to talk about anything. Yeah.
Well, obviously, we'd love to talk about Day Gardens.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, indeed. Yeah, they're really beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Very
really
beautiful.
Love how understated they are. It feels like strangely a really brave thing to do in this.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Yeah, it is kind of weird.
Yeah. But yeah, would love to start just re-Zancan and the mania of the time. We caught up with Sophia Garcia last week. You've obviously been a big part of her journey, her history,
Sure.
which happens to kind of be the recent history of generative art and digital art NFTs, really. Would love to get your thoughts. Yeah, with a few years having now passed since 2021, around how you've kind of thought about like what it means to be an artist today, and how you feel about your own career. I'm guessing like the way you've been thinking about your own career has just changed so many times
Massively.
and been challenged so many times in the past however many years.
Of
I'd love to
course.
just hear a bit about that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, it has been a roller coaster ride for me, especially starting in 2021. Just to give a bit of context, prior to that, I was working as an artist. I'd actually been, working full time as an artist, and felt that I was on a good trajectory, but it was a very kind of, a little more sustainable, predictable type of trajectory, and selling a lot of prints, drawings, paintings, and commissioned work. And so I was kind of like, looking forward to this lifestyle of like being able to pay my bills with my artwork, and just being able to spend more time working on art, making more artwork, and starting to get more exciting opportunities for creating artwork. And then obviously when 2021 came around, and Fidenza happened, and everything blew up. I mean, it's absolutely changed everything almost overnight, within the span of just a few days, and especially in the months that followed. Yeah, I mean, that changed everything about my practice. I mean, some of the most important things that did for me is it allowed me to have a team around me that really helps out. I had a couple people that I worked with part-time. Shannon, who's now my studio director, I had already been working with for a few years. But I was able to bring her on as a full-time employee to help run my studio, and several other people to, help with things like shipping and packaging and photography, and managing, social media and Discord and email and all those things. So having the sort of financial security to be able to build the studio team made a massive difference. That allows me to spend a higher percentage of my time working on art. It allows me to take on more complex projects, because sometimes there are so many details that go into these exhibitions, and when you want to do them at a high level, there's so many considerations about, you want to write about the work, you want to talk about the work, you want to photograph the work, and all of those things. It just adds up time. You really need a team to help you if you want to be able to make a lot of art and to show it at a high quality level. So for me, that's been the biggest blessing, I think, is being able to work with a team, and they're awesome. So that was a big shift for me. Being able to have a more studio space. I went from working out of a spare bedroom in my house to actually having a separate space. I can do physically larger work. I've got this like crazy custom plotter right now that's like on a 7-foot by 10-foot table. The room I was working in the beginning like wasn't even that big, So the ability to work more freely with different types of tooling has been a big adjustment. And something that changed was the mix of my work also started to include doing things like this, like doing, talking on podcasts, like starting to do interviews, talking. I guess a lot of like networking sort of stuff started to become important as people got to know my name, and there were a lot more events and opportunities. Suddenly, there was a lot more dialogue that I had to participate in that, and so I kind of became more public facing in a way. I always had been, but definitely a much more direct interaction with collectors, with curators, with institutions, and that can be a little bit exhausting. I'm an introvert. I love talking about artwork, but also my favorite thing is making artwork. And so I'd say in the last year or two, as things have calmed down a bit with the market, it's been nice to kind of be able to turn down the volume on that a little bit, to be able to spend more time in the studio, more time focused on making artwork. And I'd say that the one constant for me, you asked like, what is it to me to be an artist? Ultimately, it's to make artwork and to make the best artwork that you can, or the artwork that's the most important to you that you can. And I think over the years, I've really felt that more and more strongly, and that's been more clear to me. And also, I've also been able to focus on that goal more precisely and more purely because I have a team to help manage everything else that goes around, having a career as an artist. There's a lot to the job, but by far the most important part is and the hardest part is making the artwork. And so that's always my number one goal above anything else, is to do whatever's necessary to try to make the best work that I can.
It sounds like you haven't really wavered much, if at all, from where you were pre the mania. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of struggle to really understand NFTs and the implications, which I suppose is maybe in part why 2021 was 2021. In 2021, it was really unclear, like, what's going on here? Like, who are you? Who's selling what? Like, what does it mean to own a token? Are you buying into a collection of 10,000 just because you want to be riding a wave and trading it as you would a meme coin or whatever? Or are you just buying an artwork because you love it? It seems, Tyler, like you've been incredibly consistent all the way through, and you've never even kind of wondered where on this spectrum you might be, your work might be considered. Is this something you've ever given thought to? Because I was speaking with an artist who had released an art blocks in 2021, who kind of sees one of their series. I mean, they think about its market cap, mm-hmm. like in many ways, like they see it as some kind of pseudo cryptocurrency. I think when you start thinking along those lines, I imagine it's got to affect the way you think about releasing your work and what your work is and how people think about it. And I mean, I think that's every artist gets to choose their own path, but that feels like a pretty like slippery slope, kind of dangerous territory to get in for me personally. Like, I think that very quickly leads you away from putting the art first. And I do my best to try to release the work in the format that is most appropriate and most supporting of the work itself. So, to take the current example, right? I just put out this series, Day Gardens, a series of 50. I chose 50 because that's what I felt the work supported. I thought that was the right number of images to share from that one algorithm. It could have been a lot more. We could get into this, but I generated 40,000 images from that algorithm and curated it down to 50. So it could have been a lot more, but 50 felt like the right number for that work. And I would personally strongly encourage every artist to make decisions that way, not decisions so much based on, what number is going to max out revenue on sales or anything along those lines. I think that's, if your goal is maximizing revenue, I guess maybe that's a good strategy. But I think really as an artist, your priority should always be taking care of the art, making the best art possible. At least that's kind of how I've tried to guide things myself. And I think, there are some points where it kind of tested the limits of that. I think like Fidenza is a good example that was testing my own artistic limits of, can I actually make one algorithm that makes 999 images that are all interesting, and there's actually a compelling reason to continue scrolling through the entire collection? That was my artistic goal. That's a really hard bar to hit. You could maybe make an argument that a slightly smaller number would have been better, perhaps, but honestly, all the way right up to the end of that 999, there are interesting images that were coming out. 938, number 938 is like one of the most popular and famous ones. Is that God made?
Yeah, it is exactly. And so, if I had stopped at 899, we wouldn't have that. So I do feel good about that choice. And you can't make artistic decisions for economic reasons. You can make economic decisions like, how much am I going to price these at? You can make economic decisions for economic reasons, but you should not make artistic decisions for economic reasons. Does that distinction make sense?
Absolutely. No, it does make a lot of sense. I also wanted to ask you were talking about your earlier practice as an artist. Sorry, I'm kind of going back a little bit to that. When you were working solely as an artist and you were creating prints, and was generative always at the core of your work, or has that shifted a little bit more towards, after Art Blocks and all those releases? Did that then shift more into generative art practice? Was it always at the core?
No, since 2014, generative art has been really the heart of my practice, and that's when I first made generative art, and it was just so immediately compelling and fascinating to me that that's really what I've focused on almost exclusively since then. I do make non-generative work from time to time, especially in my sketchbook or some smaller, watercolor paintings and things like that. But no, that's really been my passion since 2014. I did do different work before that, but I'd say the main thing that Art Blocks changed is that it changed from me primarily selling things physically to selling things digitally, right? It suddenly opened up this world of digital collectors to me, and that does actually affect the artwork as well, because it changes what kind of work you can make. So, for example, Fidenza, logistically, there was no way that I was going to make 999 unique prints and find that many collectors and ship out that many prints. At that time, it's just not something I could do. But digitally, it actually was feasible. And so it sort of supported a different kind of work. And then, you take another step forward to something like QQL, right? This is a work that is curated by a distributed community of artists and collectors, and that's also not something that's going to happen physically. That's a digital only type of work. So in that regard, Art Blocks did represent a big shift in my work. But I also feel, I think it was good, honestly, that I had this period as a working artist prior to Art Blocks, because it gave me a lot of really valuable experience in printing, and I'm not going to say perfecting, but at least improving the art of printing, right? Printing is it's a skill and it's an art form, and there's so many different ways you can go about it, and it takes practice and experience to do it well. So I was glad to get a lot of reps doing that before Art Blocks, as well as I spent a lot of time doing, plotter drawings, plotter paintings, and post Art Blocks. Those are all, or post Fidenza, those are all things that I've been able to continue to use as part of my practice. And I think that adds like a depth and richness and variety to the work. So it's been nice to have so many things in my toolkit.
I'd really love to hear about your experiences in the kind of physical art world versus the digital one. And it seems as if there's a chance that success in the digital world can almost make things harder in the physical world, because you've obviously been unbelievably successful. Everyone here knows your name. Everyone wants your work. The physical art world is a totally different place, and there are rules. Like artists who are showing at Lister, Nada, pre, the white cubes, Gagosians, etc. It's the case that emerging artists sell their work for particular price points, and I imagine you just can't do that, or at least I don't think you can start working with a brilliant Lister gallery where the work should be 20k for a canvas, and buyers in that world would be expecting to buy works for 20k for a canvas. Sure. Are you even able to play to participate in that world in the way an artist ordinarily would?
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe a sensitive question. I hope that doesn't come across rude or anything.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I could talk about it. Yeah, there are very different economic realities between the traditional art world and the digital art world. And given that they started out as almost completely separate markets, completely separate networks of people, it takes time to integrate those worlds, right? And I think we have seen that over the last 4 years or so. There's been more and more connections built there between those two worlds. There's more trust and understanding. I think the traditional art world, not everybody, but certainly members from that world, understand that there is important and valuable work being made in this realm. They start to understand why it's being made, why it's exciting collectors, why it's something that tells an interesting story and deals with an aspect of society that maybe other art forms don't address quite so well. I think it's that kind of connection and understanding that sort of unlocks and allows for participation in the traditional art market. I think probably for good reason, not everybody's willing to say, somebody else is content to pay X number of dollars for this work. Maybe I should also pay that same amount. I think that the traditional art world is very like reputation based. It's very networking based. It's, as I said, it's built on trust and relationships, and the digital art world and the world of NFTs can't just be bolted on, grafted on in a sort of immediate way. I think it's a more long-term shift, and we'll see where it ends up. I don't think that we'll end up purely in the realm of the way the traditional art world has historically worked, and I don't think we'll end up in a world that's purely the way that NFTs were in 2021. I think it's a bit of a hybrid. I think the world is changing for both realms. And so, yeah, I kind of take things one step at a time, and I just continue making the best work that I can. And I look for the best opportunities to show that work and to talk about that work. And I'm not too bothered about exactly how that happens. I know that I'm on a bit of a unique path. I'm not worried about copying what's up and coming Gagosian represented artist is doing. We come from a different storyline. Like I'm on a different path than that person, and so I really don't worry too much about what a more typical path might contain. And I just try to be open minded, and as I mentioned, keep the quality of the art at the front, and always try to let that guide my decisions. And so far, that's worked pretty well for me.
I suppose my real question is, I'm sure got so much more experience than maybe anyone in the world when it comes to working with collectors in this world and collectors in the other world with your experience with Pace. It's tricky for anyone in either world going to the other side when there are different levels of demand. So, I mean, for instance, if Joe Peace were to show a work in the physical art world, his work has huge demand here because it's brilliant.
That's so good.
But if it were priced as the market would fairly price it, and buyers in a different world were kind of faced with that, they wouldn't be able to justify it because they have no understanding of the market in our world, as it were.
Right.
And it works the other way around as well, obviously. And it's really hard to see a kind of solution. Have you given any thought to that? Like how can you?
I mean, just to interject, I would actually, I'm sorry, I don't want to speak for Tyler, but I do think that you are one of the very few artists who's been navigating very well between the two worlds. The two worlds are very different, and they're going to probably remain somewhat different because they have different networks, different types of people. You've played this very well. There is a way of doing this, and you've been very wise. I think you're quite a grounded person, obviously. You're at the core an artist first. You try to stay very true to that. You had a practice before the NFT started. Then suddenly you got really so much in demand overnight. I have no idea how you stayed grounded in that, because that must be pretty overwhelming. Like, was Fidenza a curse or a blessing, in that way? And then you found your feet, though. You sort of like made decisions of working with certain people. You did something with Unit. You did something with Pace. And I think the way you worked with Unit was quite wise. You brought in, interesting curators. You did a book. Like, you played it quite well. I'm sorry, I don't think that you're political. I'm saying you were quite thoughtful of how you rolled it out. You didn't just jump at every opportunity, which I'm sure, if you're that much in demand, happens very much.
Yes.
How much do you think about the strategy? Because you must have thought about it quite carefully.
Oh, yeah. I honestly, that may be one of the hardest parts, because, typically as an artist working, you're sort of starved for opportunity. A lot of the time you're making work, and any chance you get to show your work or to sell your work is a blessing. And you very much start out in this mindset of, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'll even if the opportunities are not amazing, I'll show my work there. I'll suck it up. I'll go put in the hours, and maybe something good will come out of it. I did a lot of that kind of groundwork myself in the early days when nobody knew about generative art, nobody cared about generative art. And so going from that to an abundance of opportunity is a crazy shift. And it introduces this problem that it's a good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless of how to say no to things and what to say yes and no to. Both of those are hard. I'm not a person who really likes, conflict or disappointing people. And so saying no to opportunities that in many ways are wonderful is hard. You're like, oh, this person loves my work. They want to show it. They want to sell it. So like probably those things would actually happen and they would go well. But I have to say no anyways for other reasons. And that's really hard. That's a tough skill you have to develop. It's an unpleasant skill to develop. And then the other problem I mentioned is when to say yes. And really, if something like Fidenza happens, you have to learn how to say no to like 95% of the things that come in and to say yes to 5%, and deciding which of those 5% is hard. And fortunately, I mentioned my team. I'm lucky to have other people around me that I trust, that I'm able to talk through these opportunities with. That certainly is very helpful. Again, I'm going to go back to, rule number one is put the artwork first. Don't commit to an opportunity that might compromise the work. There are a lot of opportunities that come with strings attached. People want to sell as much as they can, and that might not suit the artwork. They might ask for more, just to put it simply, like more outputs from the algorithm than the algorithm supports, or they might want to sell more editions of the work than you really should. So that's been something that's really helped me. I also try to think about, sometimes I think about it from the perspective of who's the audience and who's going to get to see this work and get to enjoy this work. I love opportunities that allow this kind of work, generative art and algorithmic art, to get in front of a new audience, people that haven't seen it before. I mean, it's an amazing art form, and I want to help introduce the world to it. And so opportunities that lean into that to me are really exciting. So for example, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Museum of Art and Light, which is a new-ish museum. It's a museum that opened about a year ago in the town of Manhattan, Kansas, not Manhattan, New York, but Kansas. So it's not in this big cultural hub, right? It's not MoMA, it's not LACMA, but it gets a lot of foot traffic from people that are there to experience artwork. And how amazing is it to get to show those people generative art, algorithmic art in a high quality way? I love that. And so that's a big motivation for me as well. I try to think about maybe carefully choosing a path that allows me to help spread the art form a little bit. And then finally, I look for opportunities for growth, for challenging myself. I don't really want to repeat myself. I want to look for ways to push forward. A big part of what I enjoy about being an artist is learning, and the way that every project can push me to learn something new. It can be a good motivation for that. And so I'm often guided by projects and opportunities that are enticing from a sort of learning perspective. That's really been my guidance, and there's a lot more that goes into it, and every case is different, but that's a little bit how I think about, what to say yes to and what to say no to. But yeah, I really encourage artists to, especially if you find yourself to be a bit in demand, to really say no to more things than you think you can. Like, you have to actually kind of overdo it, and in order to give yourself extra breathing room and extra space for when that amazing project suddenly shows up out of the blue. You don't want to be already scheduled out for the next year or two and not be able to take on those special opportunities. So saying no is a super important skill.
Do you think about timing much? And yeah, in particular, kind of how you space your releases? Is that much of a factor?
It's not too much of a factor. I'd say that the work kind of does that naturally in some ways. The way that I like to work, I often have 3, 4, 5 different projects kind of cooking simultaneously, and often in pretty different domains. And so those works are going to mature at different speeds. And sometimes I'm starting these projects without a particular destination in mind. And actually, this was the case for Day Gardens. This is a work that I had been working on for about a year and a half when Marlene from La Collection approached me and said, we're doing something around Art Basel. Do you have any work that might be interesting for that? And I said, yeah, actually, there's this algorithm I've been kind of playing with off and on for a year and a half. I think that this will line up really well. So I haven't had to worry too much about timing. Things kind of unfold naturally, although I will say in 2023, I got myself into a little bit of a pickle having 2 solo exhibitions open back to back in, I think it was March in London with Unit, and then April with Pace in New York. And like, I mean, very different bodies of work, but like I almost died, trying to get that work done before the deadline.
But
so.
it was worth it. Like it was worth it
Right.
to see them both back to back. So I think
Absolutely.
it was a good call at the end.
I knew, yeah, it was like,
it was very cool to see the work at Pace in New York and in London, and they both were really beautifully installed.
Thank you. Yeah, that's how I felt too. I was like, you know what, this is going to be a tough.
Sometimes
this
you
is
just
going to be a
gotta
tough
go for
year,
it.
but I got to do it. So I went for it. But otherwise, timing has kind of been in my favor.
Well, I guess that kind of takes us to Day Gardens. Yeah, would love to dig in. As I say, I love the subtlety. Love how kind of I feel they're stripped back in a really brave way, because I imagine to an extent you are everyone's favorite artist who's about to release a new album, and that's got to be terrifying. And so doing something understated has to be pretty tough. Like would love to hear about the journey from
absolutely.
Start to mint.
There's quite a bit to say along those lines, actually. So I mentioned Day Gardens is a work that I have been working on off and on for the past couple of years, and I first started playing with kind of the bones of this algorithm 2 years ago, and really didn't have a particular end goal in mind. It was really just about play and discovery and crafting this algorithm, thinking about a lot about texture, thinking a lot about compositional strategy. So about how do you divide up the space in the image? How do you give it structure? How do you balance things? And most importantly, maybe how do you do that in a sort of interesting and surprising way? And that was a lot of the motivation around my initial exploration of this algorithm. And I kind of crafted the color palette and the texture and this kind of compositional engine, actually to a point that I felt pretty good about, a full year ago, and then just started generating some outputs. And I would maybe look through 100 images a day for a while. And I honestly wasn't sure how I felt about the algorithm. It wasn't like I was hearing, angels sing, and it was like clear that this thing was, perfect and ready to go. It's actually kind of interesting that the algorithm that I wrote has substantial amount of complexity in terms of what it generates. Most of the outputs that it generates are actually quite busy and complicated. And it was only through this slow process of curation over the course of months and months that I sort of arrived at a more, as you said, stripped back corner of the algorithm that I really appreciated. I was going through curating, just picking out images that really resonated with me. And I just found myself over and over again connecting the most with these images that were relatively simple. There was something about them that I just found really satisfying and peaceful. And I'm not sure why. I think, on one level, I could say there's something about the texture of the works that I really love. And maybe the simple works really allow that texture to come forward. Maybe it's about the color and the boldness of the color. I love some of the compositions in this. There's a lot of pink and yellow and fairly strong colors. And I love how it just puts those front and center in some ways. I think also this is part of where the title comes from. Day Gardens is a bit about time, right? I've just explained now this is a work that develops slowly, and gardening actually happens to be an activity that I personally really enjoy. It's a hobby of mine. It's something that my mother did a lot, and I kind of learned from her. And it's a very slow art form, right? It's like you do some work one weekend, and then a month later you come back, you work a little bit more. And there's entire seasons out of the year where nothing happens. You're kind of just waiting, and it really takes like years for you to see the results of your labor. And it kind of happens in an unpredictable way as well. There's an interesting connection to generativity there, but it's really this like kind of slow unfolding of the work that is part of this connection between the garden and the series. And I think that's also sort of reflected in the way that I hope people observe the works as well and take them in. I think that these works really require and benefit from a slower absorption by the viewer. I think you know, in the booth that we have here in Basel, there are 2 benches in there on purpose. I think that it really benefits from sitting down and taking your time and appreciating some of the more subtle things in there. And I think, you know, why this work took 2 years to develop was almost convincing myself that I was okay with the simpler compositions. Like I almost was a little bit scared of them as well. Are these really the ones that like I'm most drawn to? Do I really like that one that's like just half blue, half gray, you know? And but no, I kept coming back to it month after month, and I was like sure enough, like these, I really love these. And as an artist, when something continues to resonate for you over the course of months or years, like that's a really powerful signal that you learn to listen to. And that's what was happening for me. And so I sort of slowly convinced myself that, yeah, I really did love the simpler end of this spectrum. And so, as an artist, you trust your gut. You say, I love the work. That's good enough. I'll put it out. Hopefully that translates to somebody else feeling the same way. It's not a guarantee. You never know. But you kind of learn that your instinct is the most important, and to not worry too much about what else happens. It's kind of out of your hands to a certain extent. So
do you know what it is about them that makes them distinctly Tyler Hobbs? Because I don't, but they are.
I think the palette. I think it's the palette. I think the palette is very distinctly yours.
But it's also, it's also the texture somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Texture and palette. Yeah, you're completely right. Yeah, I think they feel very much like you. That's why I really like them, because they are simple and they don't really repeat any of your previous patterns, but it's very clear that it's your work. And I think there's something quite nice and sophisticated about paring it back as you grow more into your practice. I agree with Jamie. I think it's bold. But
I think it's an awesome move. It shouldn't
really
be ballsy,
strong.
But it is. It's,
yeah. I love it
great.
too.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question though, because we live in a very noisy environment. Like Web3 is extremely opinionated and noisy, and oh my God, everywhere we get to chat. Is it on X? Is it on Discord? Is it not on Discord? Is it side chats? And how do you, and everybody has an opinion on everything.
Yeah.
Like it's often not very positive, I find. Whenever we have a release, mostly what people want to do is either they go so often it's so encouraging and so like over the top encouraging, or it's the other way. There's not much in the middle.
Right.
And I found this very strongly over Botto. And I think Jamie and I were both really exhausted after that release because we realized, okay, this is an artist who's got a lot of attention, like yourself, and has released something new, and everybody wants to say something about it, which is wonderful, which is exciting, and it was so exciting. But like emotionally, I felt really drained after that. I remember being horizontal for like almost half a day, which never happens to me the day after. So how do you deal with? Do you protect yourself from that completely, or? Yeah, how do you deal with noise?
Yeah,
it's a great. Specifically, read these works, Layla. Sorry.
In general, like I'm sure this must happen over every single release Tyler has. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would assume. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think it's one that probably almost every artist in this space is dealing with, and probably a lot of them are struggling with and trying to figure out the right balance for themselves. I have to say, as an artist, when you put your work out there into the world, it's a very sensitive time for you. It's the embodiment of what's most important to you, and it's also sort of the very best thing that you feel you can make at that time. And so, to hear like the unfiltered response to that, it can be quite uncomfortable, and even positive feedback is not necessarily comfortable to receive when you're in that state. it doesn't necessarily matter if it's good or bad. It's just it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's the intensity. It's the intensity.
It's the intensity of it, exactly. And something that I've realized over the years is it's kind of interesting. When I was starting out, a lot of the work that I was selling was not to people online. I was actually selling a lot of it in person. For a couple of years, I participated in a studio tour in Austin, an annual studio tour. And so on the weekend, maybe 300 people would come and see my work, and I would tell them about my work and oftentimes tell them about generative art for the first time. And I get to see them take in the work, and not everybody loved it. Some people said weird things like, "Oh, you're using a computer to make art? Like, that's cheating." So it was not all positive, but gosh, I would so much rather like having that dialogue in person. It's completely different from what happens online on X or whatever, because I don't know, when you're there in person with a human, like the way we interact, the way we communicate is so much better. Like, I think people are so much more willing to be open-minded, or they're, you're talking to a real person. It's not some game you're trying to play for who can get the most likes on Twitter, So over the years, I've kind of shifted more and more of my time and attention to talking about work in high quality ways. And so that means one-on-one conversations with artists, with curators, with collectors, whether I'm catching up with them over coffee or a video chat or a studio visit. Even an email can be better. Something like the fair here at Basel that I'm at right now, I've spent a lot of time there at the booth talking to collectors, and so much more of a rewarding experience. Even if they don't like the work, the dialogue just happens in so much more of a healthy way. And so, to be quite honest, these days, like I don't read X, I don't read Twitter. I have no idea what people are saying on there. My team helps me to put out what we want to show and talk about the work, but I don't really concern myself with reading what people are saying. As you said, it's a lot of noise. I don't think it's a high quality signal. I think people have all sorts of, they might have really great positive motivations, or they might have really weird twisted motivations for saying what they say. And so I don't, I found that for myself, it's not beneficial to take in that fire hose of information that way. And that I'm much happier to experience the world of artwork and sharing my artwork through these more meaningful relationships to me and more meaningful forms of communication and conversation. So I always welcome a one-on-one conversation. If you like the work, if you don't like the work, I'd love to talk about why you don't like the work in person. I think that's an exciting conversation to have. But yeah, it's probably doesn't turn out quite that way on, when people are just trying to do hot takes on Twitter. So
what I find also is interesting is that I find that, a lot of artists that emerged like yourself in 2021 or made a big name for themselves in the peak of the market. It's like superstar quality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens to a superstar? You want to find, like, I don't know, something weird about culture where people find them at the top and they want to find fault with them.
Sure.
And so you're a lot more vulnerable. You're a lot more at danger of being taken apart,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, this is not coded well enough, or the colors are this,
Sure.
or what, whatever people come up with, And I always find that very interesting that in our industry, I find that quite intense.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel it's actually really unfair to artists. I mean, we've seen artists, I'm not naming names, but we've seen artists who've crumbled under that pressure because people are unaware how damaging that can be to this kind of, and it's kind of a safe zone. I mean, we know this about being public on, I've had nasty messages. And then when I see the people in person, they're quite mousy. And I think, well, you wrote this really nasty message to me. How come you're really nice now? Because it says something
it sounds meaner on Twitter than
yeah.
Or people just feel a little more uninhibited, right? You sort of have that moment like, oh, what do you really know, you idiot? It's a sort of, you feel a bit more empowered doing that because you don't have a human on human interaction.
Right.
I think it's
exactly.
probably normal and you don't think about it and you're reactionary or whatever.
Absolutely.
But I think, I worry about that. I worry about the pressure that is on artists. And then it's like you're at the height and then it's like, okay, let's just drop everyone because now you're not top one anymore. So let's move on to the next. And And yeah, how do you make it through that hype?
Yep.
Again, when we were speaking about this earlier, I guess the difference is in the more traditional art world. If you are lucky enough to have a gallery as an artist, you don't necessarily, I mean, artists are lucky enough to have a gallery. But if you do, then the gallery at least feels the responsibility to keep supporting you for a while, and then maybe slowly phases you out if there's no market for you. But in this industry, it can happen very quickly.
Sure.
And I wonder if that's something.
Yeah, I'd say the speed of
think about.
This world is a double-edged sword, right? Like quick to adopt and quick to leave behind. I mean, the world changes, like art changes. I think every artist has to deal with some aspects of that. It's a blessing to have your work receive positive attention, but it's certainly unrealistic to expect that will continue indefinitely. That's absolutely the exception. Not the norm for artists. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think this environment, I think you correctly point out, it can be very mentally challenging for artists to participate in. Some artists thrive in that, artists who are very maybe socially motivated or who thrive off of, I don't know, being confrontational or something like that. There are certainly personalities who might thrive from that, but I'm gonna guess that most of us just like to make our art and we want to share it, and as long as some people out there enjoy it, then that's enough for us. And it kind of sucks that there's haters that feel the need to interject. No artist expects that everybody is going to like their work. It's not the point. It's not the goal. So it's kind of weird that, like, as you say, some people feel compelled to really take the negative side of things rather than just celebrating the works that they like. I think that would be a healthier
it is
approach.
A sign of flattery, though. I think it is a sign of flattery if people do hate strongly, because it means that they have strong opinions. And I do think, it is.
Well, I saw some thoughts on Day Gardens in a Discord, and it absolutely wasn't hating even a tiny bit. But I think it was prompted by something I found quite interesting, because to me, Tyler, you're simultaneously an artist who kind of like refines. Like Day Gardens is about kind of just like, seems to be about that process of just refining an idea and just making it really excellent.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you coined long form generative art, QQL. In many ways, you are a total pioneer. And so, when someone a couple of years off the back of QQL is releasing a new project, then there might be some expectation that,
right,
I don't know, boundaries are going to be broken, and out comes like the most refined thing I've ever seen in the space.
Sure.
Like, is that something? Is there any? How do you think about that kind of?
It's a great point, and I definitely understand that. I've got a few
just
thoughts.
To be clear, it absolutely wasn't like aggressive criticism or anything. It was just a kind of,
I understand that. I understand that. I have several thoughts. I love this question. One, so I mentioned a little bit earlier, I tend to have 3, 4, 5 projects cooking at a time, and can't make any promises. But like, let's say some of the other ones that are in progress might be slightly more adventurous in other ways. I'm always looking to do something new. As I mentioned, I don't like to repeat myself, so hopefully nobody's expecting me to do Fidenza 2.0. It's not a compelling type of work for me to make right now. So I always pursue new ground, and this is a kind of work that I had not made. I mean, there are a few projects that I made that have some similarities. You could look at it, in some ways there's some connection to Incomplete Control in terms of being a bit more, shall we say, understated or focusing more on subtlety. So it's not, I don't feel that it's completely out of left field for me to make this work, but I'm not a one note person. Like, I have a lot of different feelings and things that interest me, and I tend to just pursue whatever is really calling to me at that moment. And Day Gardens is that work that was calling me at that moment. And over the course of a couple of years, it's not the only thing that was calling me. I have other ideas that I find are interesting, but this was something that felt really special to me, and I thought that the work deserved to make it out into the world, and so that's why That's why I made this series. And I don't feel compelled to only make projects on the scale of Fidenza or QQL. I think certainly there are more of those in the bag, but it's not the only kind of work that I find fulfilling or that I like to make. So sometimes.
So how do you think about the pioneer thing?
Yeah.
And if you just made something beautiful that you just love,
Yeah.
that might not feel like the next Duchamp
Right.
fountain, and yet you are a pioneer in many senses of the word. Yeah, like how do you reconcile that? How do you think about that?
Well, I think actually I don't think about that too much, because it's a little bit like if I just sat around thinking like, gosh, what can I do that would be like the next Fidenza or
what
whatever?
Can I pioneer next?
Yeah, like it's a little bit of a kind of a ridiculous question, because so much of it just depends on everything. It depends on what's going on in the world. It depends on emerging technologies. It depends on your road as an artist and how you got there. It depends on what you feel intrinsically compelled to make at that time, at least if you want to do it well. And I also don't think that things that are new and groundbreaking they're not guaranteed to be good, right? And it's not actually just new that equates to something being special or important. It's the combination of new and good, right? And so I think, like, for example, in 2021, there were many people creating things just for the sake of them being new, right? I think Def Beef's like firsts work does a good job of like kind of parodying this a little bit. It's like, first fully on-chain video game with tokenized characters or whatever. Like, just because you're the first person to do that doesn't mean that it's worthy of attention or whatever. To me, there's no point in trying to do something new just for the sake of doing something new. It has to be, first of all, good and worth doing, and done well. So I think the combination of the first person to do it well is really what's important. And you could argue that that's somewhat reflected in Fidenza. It was not the first project on Art Blocks. Neither was Ringers, but I think both of those sort of helped to take the quality of work in that format to the next level. And that's what makes those projects notable. Yeah, I kind of just trust that as I explore new territory, as long as I keep my focus on doing that work as well as I can, that will sort of handle things well on its own. And to be honest, this world of generative art and making art through algorithms and computers is so underexplored that there's like a vast territory of what you might call pioneering works still out there to be made. So I'm like not even slightly concerned about my work sort of accomplishing things like that in the future. But at the same time, the reaction to that is out of my hands. Like, there's not going to be a 2021 Fidenza craze kind of thing happening again. So I'm not worried about replicating that either. You know what I mean?
It's interesting. You're a kind of cutting edge traditional artist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, QQL was very different, and it felt definitely like there's something new going on here. It felt innovative. It was very participatory. And if I'm not wrong, there was no deadline for minting the works. What was the decision there? And also how did you, speaking about being innovative, how did that come along, that project?
It came out of almost a bit of a response to Fidenza and Ringers and all the other long form projects coming out of Art Blocks at the time. Most generative artists up to that point had utilized curation as an important part of their workflow. So the sort of question that came to me and to Dandelion, the co-creator of QQL, was what's an interesting format? What's a good format for doing long form but curated? And how does that change the artwork? How does that change what kind of algorithm you can write? And also, we have this amazing community. We have all these tools for doing things in a distributed way, thanks to the blockchain. And so we were asking ourselves questions about what potential is there for doing curation in an interesting way. And so with QQL, that's how we ended up at the question of what if the ultimate curators are actually the collectors and the community, rather than the artist or somebody like that. So, quite honestly, I felt like QQL was maybe pioneering on like 5 different fronts simultaneously. And so kind of a really risky project in a lot of ways. I think if you read the tagline on the website, it's like an experiment in collaborative generative art, and like an experiment where it was like the first 2 words. It really was an experiment because we had no idea how this kind of thing would go. So it is pretty fascinating to look back, with the help of several years perspective. And, there's all kinds of things that you can learn from looking at how QQL has played out over those years. And I think it definitely really informs work that I might make in the future. And I think it probably informs the work that other artists have made when thinking about curation and community interaction and those sorts of things too. So
what does it stand for?
QQL? Yeah. It doesn't stand for anything. It's just QQL. It's just the name.
Such a good question. I never thought about it. I'm like, what does it stand for?
Well,
it's QQL.
Yeah, we actually arrived at the name via generative process as well. We kind of settled on this idea of really liking a 3-letter name, but not necessarily one that had a particular meaning. And so we wrote this generator that probabilistically used like a handful of different letters that we liked and arranged them in different ways. And we generated 200 of them. And QQL was the one that we liked the best out of the set. So
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Q is a great letter, I have to say.
It's
underrated. Letter. It doesn't get enough airtime.
But the L does a lot of heavy lifting in there too.
L is really important, as we know.
It's a twist, you don't see L as a heavy hitting letter,
absolutely.
So
absolutely.
So there was you didn't want to tweak it. It had to be straight out of the generator.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, stick to the art form, so.
Sorry, Tyler. How long? Don't want to.
Yeah, we should be wary of your time because he's with his family. Tyler's with his family
my wife
in Basel.
is like managing the baby probably in the hotel lobby right now,
God,
so maybe not too much longer.
Got it.
Okay, all right. So we can close off quite soon. Let me just.
Well, I mean, I'd love to ask a question about. Day Gardens minted yesterday with Die with the most likes work on the same day, which was fascinating. A series of 2000s.
Oh, really?
A series of 50. Yeah.
I didn't even know. I told you, I don't read Twitter, so honestly, I'm hearing this for the first time. So
Die has done an unbelievable job of creating a online persona. It's amazing what he's done. There are maybe kind of 4 or 5 crazily successful artists who have just been plugging away on the kind of Twitter, Discord community side of things, and it works. You're obviously taking a very different approach. Does a part of you think about the community side of things and kind of cultivating that, and wonder what might happen long term if you don't do it?
Sure.
Or are you just completely uninterested, and even if it comes at some cost, it's worth it?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's almost interesting that artists have to think about this now. It's not something that artists 10 years ago, this wasn't even a question for them, right? So it's a bit of a new question, and I think every artist...
Well, to an extent. I mean, Hearst has been playing the game for decades. A lot of the artists, Koons plays the game.
Yeah. Well, Koons doesn't, but
Koons
I guess...
definitely plays the game.
I think that at the core...
Those guys are always schmoozing the billionaires.
Okay, but yes, the billionaires, but not everybody, not their 100,000 followers on Instagram or whatever, 1 million, whatever they have.
Okay, fine, they're schmoozing, they're schmoozing their buyers.
There's actually 2 questions that are going on, because I think it's very interesting. You have a studio that manages, you were very open about it. Mm-hmm. You... before you took time off, you announced that your studio will take over communications on X and Instagram or whatever your social media is. And to be honest, it was a bit of a like, what, why, how,
Right.
why, how can you do this to us?
Yeah.
And we're definitely navigating in an industry where, or in a time, in an era where you have to be very approachable, and people need to know who you are as a person.
Right.
And it's definitely a big factor of the digital space, that there is a lot of one-on-one relationships with artists,
Right.
and collector. Do you worry about that, like stepping away from that completely and letting your studio do the communication, like taking away basically your own voice?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd love to answer on that. I'd say, first of all, to the folks that support my work, that are collectors of my work, like I care so much about those people. I mean, they're amazing. They're people that I feel a huge connection to, and when I get to meet them in person, like it's almost always the case that there's a real bond there, because I think we both, we have something really deeply in common because of that. And the way I think about it is that I want to spend my time and my energy creating something for people that's the best thing that I can create and the most meaningful thing that I can create. And for me, I believe that is my work, my art, and maybe also you could include my writing in that. And that's the best thing that I have to give people and to share with people. I don't think that throwaway thoughts on X are the best thing I can give people. I don't think that a Twitter space every 2 weeks is the best thing that I can give people. And so it's not about me not caring about those people. It's not about me wanting to run away from people or to, not share with people. It's about me honestly wanting to share only the best and most important thing that I can share. And so, if I had to describe or give you the pie chart of like, how am I spending my time now? It's like, I have a baby, I have a 7-month-old baby. So it's like family time and making art. And there's like almost nothing else in that pie chart. And that just that's the most meaningful and important way I can divvy up my time. It's just hard to compete with either of those things. It's hard for me to look at almost anything else and say that's more important than spending time with my family, or more important than making artwork. And so I hope that people in the community out there understand that. I know a lot of them do. I hear from people in person all the time who, I tell them like, oh, I haven't looked at Twitter in a year. And they're like, good, like, don't do it, don't look at it. And that's honestly the number one reaction I get when I tell people about that. And that kind of motivates me to keep going a bit too.
I'm sure a lot of artists will find it pretty uplifting to hear that it is possible to be successful in this space.
And I'm in a privileged position, right? Like I'm very much aware that if you're building your audience and you're building your collector base, that you probably can't afford to do that. And I wish that weren't the case. I recognize that I'm in a privileged position, but also it gives me an opportunity to focus my time on my family and on making artwork. And so I'm going to kind of take advantage of that. I still want to connect with folks. I think this is a great example right here. This is a high quality conversation between real people who really care about the topics that we're discussing. And so this is the kind of interaction with the community that I love to do. And so that's why I'm trying to focus my time that way.
Yeah, I think it's really wise. And I think it's just
congrats, what a place to be. Yeah, it's so smart.
Absolutely.
So smart.
Very smart.
Yeah.
But I think you just have a really good way of being quite focused and grounded. I feel like you're very focused and grounded. It's very inspiring to see that, because it's so easy to get swept away in frenzy.
Yes.
It's kind of that attention deficit era where we want to be everywhere at all times. And just to kind of say, okay, I'm going to miss out on some things,
yes,
but as a result, I'm going to be focused on the things that are in front of me.
Absolutely.
That's a really hard thing to do. It really is difficult,
Absolutely.
But it's important to do, because otherwise you just can't refine your craft. And Yeah.
Yes.
And on that note, again,
Can I ask
congrats.
2 questions?
Yeah.
Sorry, it sounds like you were
This
getting
is usually
have we
what
got 2 very quick ones? Or
If they're actually very
we're
quick, let's go for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In one sentence, why Fidenza? As in, like, do you know what it was about Fidenza? No, do you know what it was about Fidenza that caused it to catch the way it did? Like, if you had to kind of pinpoint what it was about it, what do you reckon?
In one sentence, it had the perfect blend of variability and unity with a distinct and recognizable character. Yeah, sure. There's more things I want to say, but you limited me to one sentence, so that's all I can say.
And then second, stupid question, but there's a real question in there somewhere. Is generative art dead? Obviously it's not, but...
I think that generative art is evolving. Art never stays still. Look at the history of art. You know, every decade has at least a couple of different movements in it, and those don't repeat. It's, you know, we haven't gone back to, you know, abstract expressionism, 2.0 or Dada 2.0, or there are echoes of these things throughout time. Obviously, it's always fun to go back and revisit and remix and look at old ideas through new lenses, but the world is changing, and art changes right along with it. And the way that generative art exists and the kinds of questions it will ask and the kinds of things that will be created through the lens of generativity are shifting. And so I think people just need to have an open mind about what can be generative and how it can be applied. And in that regard, I don't think it's dead at all. I think if anything, it's sort of infusing the mainstream or more traditional mode of thinking about art. I think generativity is now sort of becoming a parameter of how we think about artwork, rather than just a genre, which I think is the correct way to think about it.
And
Great answer.
Great answer. And last, before we leave, what's next?
Well, work that's honestly completely different from Day Gardens is coming up next. I mean, it'll take me a little bit of time. I've got a bunch of big projects I'm doing, but I think maybe towards the end of this year, early next year, you'll see something from me. And just stay tuned, because the next stuff is like pretty wild. So I'm having a lot of fun in the studio. I'm staying very, very busy in the studio. So there's a lot coming.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tyler. It's been such a delight to speak to you, to hear you speak about your work, and your new series of work is stunning. It really is stunning. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And thank you for jumping in. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely time with your family in Basel. When are you going back to the States?
I'm actually staying in Europe for the whole summer. So I've got some more adventures planned.
Beautiful. Okay,
Nice.
well, if you are in London, let us know.
Absolutely. Will do.
Great to see you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye,
Take
Tyler.
care. Bye-bye.